we need to give the mayor's office the room to operate these, and then we can learn from it if once we do some of these. But we're also going to have a lot of different sites, different demographics at different sites, and so we can't just sort of be overly prescriptive.
That's Seattle City Council member Eddie Lynn talking about a council committee vote this week on some amendments to fine-tune the mayor's plan to expand the amount of shelter spaces in Seattle. One big issue: what sort of buffers are needed between these sites and schools or child care centers, for example? There's been a shift in position for a few council members this week, so how might that affect the rollout of this program? Plus, a change in direction for the Seattle Metro Chamber of Commerce, and a big decision about data centers locally, too. All this and more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I am a host on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I'm with my friend and co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, from the weekend into the early part of this week was so nice outside, I decided to take the covers off the deck furniture, and naturally, the clouds started rolling in right when I did that. Is it my fault that the weather turned that way? I just kind of feel like I jinxed it for everybody in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm very, very sorry.
I don't know. I'm looking out the window right now and it's pretty sunny. So I think maybe you paid a small, short, temporary price, but it seems like the weather's back to me.
Okay, I'll take it. This is the way May goes, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. As always, thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our patrons. And if you're not a patron, love to have you. At the $5 level, you can access Patrons First podcast. You can even get a sporty-looking decal for your laptop or coffee mug. Find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and support the shout. Shout to Converge Media. The video version of the show is on Converge, Wednesday nights at 7. Great for me to talk to Amari Salisbury earlier this week on AM 1150. Check out that show online. And also a big thanks to our show sponsor, Phillips Law Firm. Life doesn't come with a warning. If an auto accident disrupts your world, Phillips Law Firm is there to make it right. With over 80 years of combined legal experience, they fight for the compensation you deserve. Call 1-800-JUSTICE or visit justiceforyou.com. Phillips Law Firm, unleashing justice for you. All right, let's go. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Well, folks, we're going to lead the show with more details on our local homelessness response because those amendments to the mayor's encampment ordinance are still taking shape this week in council committee. And David, there was a big issue I heard the council members talking about this week at their press availability, the idea of setting up buffers for city-endorsed encampments so they're a certain distance away from schools or parks. So the city council had an amendment sponsored by Council President Hollingsworth and Councilmember Rivera with an idea to enforce these 750-foot buffers possibly, which, as reported in Public Cola, could really limit where these camps could be throughout the city. So I heard this week from the council president that she was going to withdraw that amendment and see if social service agencies here locally could provide a better idea of what those buffers might look like. Talk to me about this, David. What do you make of what the council president is doing here? And what are your thoughts overall on this whole buffer issue?
I think the buffer issue, I mean, it kind of gets to the heart of why this is a little harder said than done, easier said than done, which is that, I mean, and it also kind of gets to I think the reason why there's going to be neighborhood opposition is this perception that maybe these shelter sites, whatever they may end up being, could be unsafe or unsightly, and
Right.
it kind of gets to the challenge here of just how do you put these sites in locations that maintain good relations with the neighborhood, and also how hard do you press on the city writ large to get these sites set up? Because if every single site goes through the kind of process and hand-wringing that
Yes.
sometimes we see, then
Yeah.
basically they're never going to get to 4,000 units.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the other side of this is you want them to succeed, and so you want to have some kind of neighborhood interaction. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I think it kind of gets at the whole tension underlying setting up this level of shelter is there is no way that you can get 4,000 units without it being at least semi-apparent to most people in the city. They're going to have some interaction with it.
Yeah.
And so here you have an example of the council sort of trying to legislate distance between neighborhoods and those shelter sites. But I think maybe a realization that you just can't really do that in the same way that you could before and still get to 4,000 units.
Yeah, and we touched on this last week with regard to these good neighbor agreements the city's trying. They're really kind of tying to these new shelters, I should say. Councilmember Kettle was making the point this week that if these community engagement plans that the city's trying to do, if those agreements are effective, then the city wouldn't need buffers as much, right? Do you see where he's going with that one?
Yeah, that's the idea.
The hope,
I
yeah.
just don't think, yeah, I just don't know that there's any way to predict every variable until you've actually got sites up and running. It's sort of the old, we don't know what's in the bill until we pass it. It's
Right.
kind of we don't know what's going to work and what's not until these things exist. And I think the reason perhaps for the withdrawal is some pushback on, you know, pre, precluding certain arrangements before they're given a chance to succeed,
Hmm.
and getting in the way of the larger goal of setting up shelter and what that means. Um, so it and I think Hollingsworth comes at this. I think Hollingsworth comes at this, because she's from the pot business and has some memory of the buffer zones that were put up for pot shops around the city, and so therefore saw this as an appropriate approach here. At the same time, I think if you ask pot shop owners, it's really hard to find places to set
Oh,
up in
yeah.
the city because of those buffer zones. Um, and so I would anticipate that part of the reason that this was withdrawn was fear about, again, you know, killing this effort before it really even gets a chance to get going.
Yeah, I guess for me, it always gets complicated when maps get involved. I've got
Yeah.
this throwback memory that just kind of clicked in when you were talking about this. Mike O'Brien, the former council member, and this has got to be close to 10 years ago here, they were talking about, okay, camping, we don't want to allow it
Hmm.
on city streets and things of this nature. So his proposal was, well, you know what? Let's set up areas and put it on a map where people can camp. It's like they're endorsed. If you want to camp here in this park area, go for it. And there was a huge pushback on that one. I mean, when you're actually putting it in black and white saying, yep, it's okay to camp here, that, I mean, you know what I mean? That really changes the dynamic when you have to put it down in black and white, put it on a map.
It does, yeah, because people can look at their home and
Yeah.
count how many steps they are
Yes.
from
Hmm.
proposed change. This always happens with zoning conversations, is
Yeah.
there's a lot of abstract, we're seeing this now. There's sort of these abstract ideas of density and uh, growth. It's not until the city actually releases the maps that you see the real pushback from neighborhoods because people are in theory in favor of something until they find their house on a map and see that it's going to affect them in some
Hmm.
way.
Yeah.
And then that's when the pushback comes.
Yeah.
I think, again, the council members who are pushing for these kind of good neighbor agreements and buffer zones are making the argument that if you put one site in and it goes drastically wrong with the
Right.
neighborhood, it's going to make it really hard to do more in the future. I think
Hmm.
that's probably true. That's
Yeah.
probably not an incorrect assessment.
Yeah.
The mayor's office agrees with it. They say they want to do that too.
Yeah.
Again, as we've said a bunch of times, though, it's how do you ensure success and decent relationships with the surrounding neighborhoods without turning over, basically giving them veto power over this
Yeah.
effort? That's a tough line to walk.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, following up on last week's big news about local officials aiming to shut down the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, the county council this week is discussing legislation that would require the King County executive to assess and report on the KCRHA's corrective action plan, a plan that's due on May 23rd, so just a few weeks. An initial briefing has been set for June 15th from the executive. A longer report on how to possibly transition contracts away from the KCRHA is due on August 1st. David, I know there's a lot happening here, but you wrote recently about this in the Seattle Times, how shutting down this agency and the speed at which that happens could have an impact on people who are homeless and the agencies that serve them.
Yeah, I think that the biggest fear is a repeat of the standing up in the first place.
Okay.
Because when they established the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, there was this massive bureaucratic shift away from county and city government into the central authority. A lot of people got laid off. Uh, so there was just the technical piece. And then a lot of these, the contracts when they went over there, they had to go through all these new processes. There was this huge lag at the outset of providers getting paid, and it was seen as a pretty traumatic event for a lot of homeless service providers and nonprofits. And their biggest fear is that even if they think that the homelessness authority is not doing a very good job, and maybe even in theory support is disillusioned. They are very scared about going about that in a way that repeats how difficult it was setting up in the first place.
Yeah.
Basically, having contracts get lost, having
Yeah.
paychecks get lost. I'm sure most providers have a person at the agency that they
Yes.
deal with.
Yes.
Losing that person, maybe that person gets laid off. And so there's just a lot of caution being urged around, because the political momentum is pretty clearly in favor of dissolving the agency.
I'm seeing that
But I
too.
think there is some concern about, okay, sure, maybe it's okay to dissolve it, but are we sure that what we're going to replace it with is better and more effective? And no one has a great answer for that just yet.
Yeah, I remember I was talking with Councilmember Kettle about that, the Seattle City Council this week, and he had this point that, hey, we know what KCRHA is a little bit, but we don't know what KCRHA 2.0 looks like, and that
Right.
idea of transitioning to it is going to take some time. From what I've seen from Councilmember Dombowski on the county council here, it looks like there's a plan to make this happen within the span of a year. I saw a 12-month figure out there. Does that sound like enough time to you? What do you think?
Yeah, the original agreement dictated that if it's dissolved, it should be done it should be done in not less than a year. So
Right,
it's
right.
saying you have to do this over the course of a year unless the city council and the King County Council come in and vote to do it differently. They could change that if they really felt like it was desperate and needed to go fast. But
Okay.
it is written in both to the original agreement and Dimbowski's motion to dissolve it that it has to take a year. The idea being you're trying to not, again, repeat the mistakes of the
Yeah,
establishment in the first place.
right.
Um,
But he wants to go faster, doesn't he, in terms of dissolving this?
I think he would be open to it. His motion, though, his original motion to dissolve it still has that 12-month mark
Yeah. Okay.
on it. Um, you know, and it does raise questions about, do you want this lame duck agency to exist over a protracted period of time, or do you want to kind of pull the Band-Aid off? Um, I don't know the answer to that. Again, there has not been a great theory of what follows KCRHA just yet. I think these presentations and plans will kind of create that theory.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I think a lot of people in the service provider world, and they've told us this, have PTSD from what it was in the first place. And just for as much as they might complain about KCRHA, they are not particularly enthused about yet another bureaucratic transition.
Yeah. Devil you know versus devil you don't. Last touch
Yeah.
on this one. I think another part of the cautious approach here is figuring how much it will cost the city and county to actually pay down KCRHA's overspending and debt, and also how to deal with all these different contracts too. I mean, that financial part of it, I think, is going to take a ton of time. I mean, that feels like the big drag on time for this for me.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not exactly a time when there's a lot of money flowing around to
Right,
handle
right.
these things. Um, yeah, it's a tricky situation.
Yeah. What?
This is
Sorry.
why I'm glad I'm not in charge.
Yeah, right. Good point. I'll throw another one at you. This whole idea that these federal funds from the continuum of care, as it's called, for
Right.
homelessness are supposed to be coming into the KCRHA. You had written about this within the span of a couple of weeks here. I know you don't want to dissolve it before that because that would really, really complicate things. Can you talk about federal funding kind of in the here and now and what this means down the line? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean it's a precarious time too to be sort of acknowledging defeat on an approach to homelessness because the Trump administration, there's a lot of pressure from the Trump administration to move away from the housing first model, and I think there's a lot of association between how, the Seattle King County Regional Homelessness Authority and being in favor of the housing first model. And
Yep.
so, there's some fear that waving the white flag on this authority will kind of signal open season to the federal government to stop sending money this direction. I don't know how, I'm not smart enough to know how much inertia the federal government systems have. If it's easy to just pull a lever and shut off those funds, I'm not
Mm.
sure. Um, but certainly, yeah, how much comes from the federal government is I think again, we talked about. I'm not hearing a lot of full-throated defense of the King County Regional Homelessness
Yeah,
Authority.
right.
There's not a lot of out and out advocates for it, saying it's doing a great job. All of the arguments against dissolving it are questions like this of what are the implications and are we going to make things worse by dissolving it? Not so
Yeah.
much how can we make things better?
Yeah, yeah, good point. And folks, if you want to check it out on Seattle Channel this week, I'm talking about this issue with Councilmember Dubowski, also Lisa Dugard from the PDA. So looking forward to a good show there. Thank you, David, for checking in with me on that one. All right, up next, a change for the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce with a new leader that might help bridge a political gap between the business world and City Hall. That story coming up on Now Hear This. A new story out this week, David happened to write it, about the new head of the Seattle Metro Chamber, Joe Wen. If you thought he was an odd pick for the job, you're really onto something there. Wen was talking a lot about taxing the wealthy as a state politician, and now he's heading up a business coalition who's pretty much up in arms about the state's move to tax income, among other policies out there. Here's how he responded to a question about the need for progressive revenue in our state when I was talking to him as a King County executive candidate in 2021.
So what ends up happening is that when we're trying to help people who are most on the margins, we end up pushing them closer to the margins because of our regressive nature of the taxation system. So when people say, have a wealth tax, it's because we can't afford to tax poor people anymore because that's who we're trying to help.
David, great reporting on this story. I guess I wanted to get your take here. What do you make of what the chamber is trying to do with Joe Wen in this role? Has Wen himself changed? What's going on here?
I think the chamber and they've never really exactly said it in these terms, but I think the chamber feels like they don't know how exactly to gain traction in local politics on taxes, specifically on taxes around Amazon, on wealthy residents. They had some luck in people that they supported winning elections in 2021 and 2023, but that was really around public safety that those people got elected, and it didn't. They didn't touch the payroll tax on Amazon. Bruce Harrell later would do his own tax.
Yeah, right.
For whatever you want to make of the kind of swing to a more moderate council, the approach to progressive taxation and the basic voter support of that doesn't appear to have ever gone away. And so I think there's some feeling that they don't exactly know how to gain traction pushing back on some of the what feels like inevitable march towards new taxes on Amazon and rich people. And then, of course, Katie Wilson's elected, and then they're really feeling like they're lost at sea. And so in Wynn, they feel like they have kind of the perfect mix of a guy who got his start as a progressive firebrand. He was kind of hailed as, when he was first elected, as, this new wave of young progressive Democrats coming into power.
Yep.
But who over the last 6 or 7 years has drifted away from that kind of progressive firebrand approach.
Label. Yeah.
And he's taken he's taken a softer tone. He seems to be kind of playing politics a little bit more. He's worked well with more moderate and business types. And so they see that they kind of have this guy who has walked the progressive walk, but is at this point no longer the progressive pro-tax firebrand that he used to be.
Yeah.
And in that, they think they have somebody that can support their policy positions, but who might open doors into Mayor Katie Wilson's office or Executive Gurmai Zahalai's office in a way that maybe some of their past leaders did not. It's a bit of a gamble, I will say, because they're banking on Mayor Katie Wilson caring about who's in charge of the chamber and being open to listen to that. But I think it's a little. Joe Wynn said if Bruce Harrell had been elected, he probably wouldn't be head of the chamber at this point. So his marching orders are pretty clear, which is make inroads in a progressive city hall, and if you can't reverse new taxes, at least slow their rise.
Yeah, I guess that was my next question here is what kind of impact do you think Joe Wen can have? Your colleague Danny Westneat was writing about this a few days ago. The mayor's actions may be pushing big business away from the city in the terms of some of her rhetoric, et cetera. Can he help in that regard? Where do you see that interaction happening?
Yeah, he after the piece published this morning, he texted me and said that he thinks the budget discussions will be telling if my hiring worked or not. And so he's kind of setting his own benchmark. It's basically if when the city council takes up the budget next year, if the conversation is around new taxes on Amazon and new progressive revenue to close the budget hole, then it's not working. Then his job is not complete. If they are talking more about cuts and paring back programming and fixing the sort of basically out of whack budget formula that has dogged the city for years, then he'll see himself as successful. He's being pretty aggressive. He's meeting with a lot of the council people pretty regularly, and he's had some conversations with the mayor, as far as I understand it. So, he is just one guy in the city, and the chamber isn't an elected office. So if City Hall wants to ignore them, they can. But their hope is that they're making a play here with somebody who they feel, even more than their past CEOs, can kind of speak the correct language, and that will open some doors.
Yeah, and look forward to this as well, folks. Later this week, the mayor is talking about some of the different budget activity that's happening in the city, waiting on an announcement from her later on this week. I'll tell you more about that when it unfolds on Seattle Channel. Also on the docket for the city council this week, a vote to cancel the creation of a stadium district. We have talked about that on the podcast, moving its way through a final committee vote. And then something I thought was interesting, David, a move to vote the shared streets ordinance out of the Transportation Committee onto the full council. So shared streets are designated streets where pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicle traffic share a portion or maybe all of the same street. This is based on a state law passed last year. It says pedestrians have the right of way over bikes, bikes over vehicles, and the maximum speed is 10 miles per hour. David, this kind of sounds like a big deal to me, but we don't know where these streets would be placed as of yet, right? What do you think about this shared streets thing?
No, yeah, it's early. I do think the pandemic had kind of a big sway on how people think about streets. You remember when everyone was in lockdown, they created these what were they called? Welcoming streets? I can't remember exactly.
There you go. Right,
them,
with the cafes and stuff that would bump out into the street and so forth.
Yeah, and certain streets where they, if you were in a car and you didn't live there, you weren't supposed to drive through, and it said closed and things like that.
Yep.
So that was a big shift. I don't know where these end up being. It'll be interesting to follow. I'll give my broad take, though, which is I think that if Mayor Katie Wilson wants to make an immediate mark, outside of shelter, I do think transportation is probably where she could do it most broadly and most quickly, because when the last transportation levy passed, former Mayor Harrell really didn't put any parameters around it. He probably thought he was going to be reelected, and so wanted to give himself a lot of flexibility in how he could spend this transportation money. Of course, he was not reelected. Mayor Katie Wilson was. And so as a result, she has $1.5 billion transportation levy that really does not have any strings attached to it. And while there is, of course, some council involvement, it isn't quite to the level of needing to pass bills. And, she kind of has this money at her fingertips. And so I know this is kind of coming out of the council, and it doesn't really speak specifically to the shared streets ordinance. But I do think that if Katie Wilson wants to reshape Seattle in a way that reflects a Katie Wilson mayor, the transportation sector is probably the place she could do it, and do it the most quickly. We've already seen some of that with the bus lane on Denny Way,
right,
late, and the Lake Washington Boulevard being bike only for more weekends and for longer. We're already seeing some of that, but I would expect we'd see a lot of maybe sort of aggressive transportation moves during over 4 years of her term.
Yeah, for someone who was formerly the head of the Transit Riders Union here in Seattle, definitely that type of issue is in her wheelhouse here. Just real quick, back on the shared streets thing. From what I understand, the city traffic engineer is kind of authorized to set in place procedures as to how roadways would get this shared street designation. Is it something neighborhoods could lobby for, or how do you see this unfolding? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. The city engineer, it's always been a pretty powerful position, actually.
Right.
They have a lot of sway, and sometimes that's more. I actually don't even know who the city engineer is these days.
I was trying to remember some more of the DOT names too, but
yeah, it used to be Don Ho Chang, right?
Right.
He was the most forward-facing. He had his social media account of just walking around the city and looking at interesting streets.
Yes.
So no, I don't know exactly how this process would go, but again, just a remark on the side that if you're a transportation nerd and want to influence city policy, being the city transportation engineer is probably as good of a job as you could get.
There we go. Some career counseling from David today. I always love hearing that. All right. Well, coming up, folks, the people have spoken, and a data center moratorium is in the works for the city of Seattle. That story coming up on What's Next. Okay, so following up on another story from a few weeks ago, the city of Seattle took in more than 50,000 comments pushing back on allowing for large data centers here in Seattle over environmental concerns, concerns about possible impact on ratepayers. Now it appears the city has a moratorium in the works here. David, what are you hearing about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an example of the city kind of feeling a little flat-footed here, not really sure how to handle what could be an increase in power usage and therefore increased demand for power and therefore increased prices. And so figuring out exactly how the data centers interact with typical ratepayer rates. I think the idea behind the moratorium is that this would give the city some space to figure all that stuff out. Um, I think the more cynical view is it's just something that people don't really like and don't want to look at, and is a way to prevent them from coming at all.
Hmm.
And so far it maybe is actually being effective. Two of the five data centers that had applied have apparently backed out at this
Right.
point. So we're really just down to three. Um, it's an issue that it's one. I think it's an issue that is moving faster than government. Data centers and the companies that are building
Hmm.
them are moving as quickly as they can and don't have the same processes as local government.
Yeah.
And so I think these moratoriums in some ways are panicked responses to trying to wrap their arms around an issue that seems to be moving much beyond their speed that they're used to working at.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and so, I think in a lot of ways, the city council and mayor don't know how they feel about data centers and how they fit into Seattle. And I think the moratorium is a reflection of that.
Yeah. Move fast and break things. Meet the Seattle process. We got
Yeah,
some
exactly. Yeah,
interesting
exactly.
stuff here. One quick twist here that I thought was interesting. Some of the areas that City Light covers are actually outside of city limits. I'm thinking about Tukwila, for example. It almost seems like that would be outside of city jurisdiction. I mean, this is again a moving target, I know, but how do you figure out a moratorium there if it's not exactly on city
Yeah, that's a
property? You know what
good.
I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I always think a lot. I always find City Light quite a fascinating department. I like
Mm,
thinking about it. I've always found that surprising. Like Burien gets Seattle City Light
yep.
service. Um, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I don't, in some ways, I'm not sure the city cares that much what Burien does. I think they just want to figure out, again, I think more than any kind of one specific thing that they need to figure out. I think a moratorium is the
A
fact that
pause. Yeah.
they don't
Mhm.
know what they don't know what they're doing or what's going on, and they just
Yeah.
don't want to get flat-footed here.
Yeah.
I think that's a debatable. I think people can have a good faith debate over whether it's the right thing to be doing at this point, but
Hmm.
uh, I just think, frankly, again, it wasn't a thing that came up that much on the campaign trail for Mayor Katie Wilson. It wasn't something she was asked about a lot. Is what do you think about data centers in Seattle? And now she's needing to confront that, and I'm perhaps if we've seen anything from her, it's she wants time and space to make decisions and does not want to be forced into a decision more quickly than she feels like until she's ready.
Yeah, like surveillance cameras, things of that
Surveillance
nature.
cameras. She was
Yeah.
very clear about I'm not going to be pressured into making a
Hmm.
decision here before I'm ready. She
Yeah.
said that I think publicly, and I would imagine that the moratorium is a similar feeling that she is being sort of pressured into crystallizing her stance on data centers in Seattle and AIs. She had an AI announcement
Hmm.
yesterday, and
Yeah.
um, I think a moratorium gives. I think the thought is it gives her some space to come up with exactly what she does think.
Hmm.
There are people who are pro building data centers and see it as a good chance for construction jobs and new revenue for the utility, and believe that putting a moratorium on this is just kind of NIMBYism that's going to kill potential new business and tax revenues and jobs. But here we are.
Yeah.
It seems the council's in support and she's in support, and I expect that the moratorium is going to take effect.
Yeah. And I mean, this is just kind of the whole concept behind this is putting a pause on this so the council can try to figure some of this stuff out. And it's certainly something that cities are going through around the country. So, yeah, very interested to see how the city of Seattle does that, especially surrounded with as many tech giants as we have here in the Emerald City. But it is time to wrap up, David, and yet again, checking in on the Mariner mojo here. So we had this pitcher for the Atlanta Braves in town this week, J.R. Ritchie, from your ancestral homeland of Bainbridge Island. Were you secretly rooting for him to win against the M's, and don't worry, I won't tell anyone if that was the case.
Well, I'm quite a bit older than he is.
Okay,
so
okay.
I don't have any direct personal connection to the Richies. I did see that the Town and Country grocery store in Winslow and near the ferry on Bainbridge on its sign said, we're rooting for you, J.R. Ritchie. And
There you
so
go.
I do like the community. I do like the community feel. I feel like last night's game was kind of the perfect scenario. He pitched pretty well. He looked pretty good, and the Mariners still came back and won.
Right. They won it off the relief pitcher, which was
exactly.
Probably the right way to twist that. So, all right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cheers to J.R. Ritchie, and hey, cheers to the M's for beating the best team in baseball early on this week, at least. Thank you, David. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Please become a patron. Check out Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Pledge $5 per month or more, and thank you for the help. Great to have you listening to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you tune in. To our 14 listeners in Thailand, Kapun Ka, thank you. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2026.